If you've been involved in an accident in an Uber or a Lyft, these accidents are extremely complicated. So I'm going to give you some information that you need to know. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michael Coker. I'm a personal injury lawyer in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I'm going to give you some important information about car accidents that occur while you're a passenger or even a driver in an Uber or a Lyft. Uber and Lyft cases are something new that just came out a few years ago, obviously, with Uber and Lyft being much more common and much more prolific than they even were 4 or 5 years ago. But we in the personal injury world have had to pivot how we do things and learn more about how a Lyft works or how an Uber works to understand whether or not you have a case. Now, whether or not you have a case depends a lot on whether you were a passenger, whether you were a driver, and your status, and whether or not your driver was at fault for the accident. So let's talk about a few of those different scenarios and why they might matter for you. First, let's talk about if you're a passenger in an Uber or a Lyft. If you're a passenger in an Uber or a Lyft, obviously, in most, I would say almost nearly all situations, you're not going to be at fault for the accident. Nothing that you did caused the collision. And so the issue you might face in these cases is the Uber or the Lyft attorney that's hired by their insurance company might try to blame another vehicle. And so what happens is you as the passenger sometimes get stuck in this court battle between the Uber driver, this third party vehicle, as to who's responsible or who's at fault. Now, the best case scenario is when that's clear cut and the insurance companies have nothing to fight about. But in many cases, when there's some dispute, you're the passenger and you're just stuck having to sit there and wait it out while these two entities try to determine who's at fault. This is a scenario where you definitely want to hire a lawyer and you don't want to try to handle it all by yourself. Because in these scenarios, you're going to run into problems where you're an innocent victim stuck between two insurance companies. And so I would definitely recommend whether you hire us, hire another law firm, talk to a lawyer, see what your concerns are, get them addressed, and then make sure you're protected. But if you're a passenger, the driver of your vehicle might have their own insurance. Let's say it's Progressive, State Farm, Allstate. Sometimes that coverage will not apply because the individual is driving for Uber. They're a driver for hire. And that's a business purpose. The person's trying to make money. And so often these policies will have exclusions written in where the accident is not covered. In that situation, the policy for Uber or Lyft would apply. Now, different states have different policies that cover Uber, and it's always changing as rates change and they may hire a new company. And so only through an experienced lawyer in Georgia can you determine exactly who the proper insurance is and exactly whether or not you're covered. Don't just go by what's on the police report. The police report might say that the driver has Progressive, but Progressive might not give coverage because the person was driving for Uber. And so if you're a passenger, the first thing you need to do, always find the correct coverage. Always make sure you know exactly what coverage would cover you if you're injured as a passenger in an Uber or a Lyft. And don't always assume that it's the insurance company that's listed on the specific motor vehicle accident report. Second, let's say you're a driver for Uber or Lyft. And let's say that you are somebody who's involved in an accident where someone else is at fault. You might wonder whether or not any of that Uber or Lyft coverage would apply to you. And the truth is, it might. It might give you what's called uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage. And how much coverage there is may depend on your specific situation, what your status was on the app, whether you were looking for a ride, had picked up a ride, whether you were just had the app turned on. And so only through an experienced lawyer are they going to be able to tell you in your specific state, in your specific county and city, what coverage applies or may apply to you if you're an Uber driver, a Lyft driver, involved in an accident that's not your fault, and then ultimately need that coverage. A great experienced lawyer who does these cases regularly will know what that coverage is, can tell you what that coverage is, and can make sure that your medical bills get paid. The third situation, let's say that you are just driving down the road and another vehicle hits you, and that vehicle is driven for an Uber or a Lyft. Now, again, how much coverage applies in that particular case is going to depend a lot on the status of the driver in the app at the time of the accident. So, if the driver, for example, had a passenger and was driving a passenger at the time, that's going to mean and trigger a certain amount of coverage in the policy. Let's say the situation is that the driver is just driving around and has the app turned on. That's going to trigger an even different layer of coverage. So, the status of the driver in the app is going to depend on how much coverage and liability coverage is available to you as the other individual involved in the accident. So, if you're a driver, you're driving down the road and you're hit by a driver of an Uber or Lyft, the most important question you need to know is whether or not that person has coverage under their individual policy, which could likely not apply if they're driving for Uber or Lyft, or two, whether the app was turned on, whether they had a passenger, because those specific classifications are going to change the amount of insurance that's available to you as the other driver. And so, as you can see, this insurance coverage and the amount of the coverage is extremely complicated when you're dealing with Uber and Lyft cases. And so, you need to make sure that you hire a lawyer that understands these cases, knows what to do, and knows how to protect you and make sure that you get every dollar that's available to cover your expensive medical bills. And so, if we can help you with a case, or if you have questions, obviously feel free to give us a call. I'm more than happy to answer questions, free consultations, so you can just hear from me what my opinion is if you live in the state of Georgia. But even if you live somewhere else, Uber and Lyft cases are extremely difficult, extremely insurance intensive, and extremely complicated. So definitely call a lawyer and have them determine what you can apply for or use in your particular case. That's pretty much all the information I have for today. If you like getting these updates about Georgia law or, insurance with Uber and Lyft cases, or really any type of cases, definitely like and subscribe to this podcast, and we'll keep these episodes coming out. But until next time, everybody out there, stay safe, and thanks for listening.